For years, the veteran Elias Ward lived in silence, tending the empty lighthouse that had long stopped shining. But on one stormy night, his loyal German shepherd, Rex, began clawing furiously at the wooden floor, refusing to stop until Elias followed his lead. Beneath the old planks, he discovered a hidden stone tunnel, and inside, an ancient journal belonging to Thomas Avery, a lightkeeper from a century ago. The entries spoke of shipwrecks, lost souls, and a light that saved hundreds from the sea. But one question now haunts Elias's mind. What secret did Avery die protecting? Stay with us to find out the truth behind the Lighthouse Sanctuary. Tell us, where are you watching from? And if you believe that some lights are never meant to fade, please subscribe to support our channel. The sea breathed in gray silence, its waves folding against the Oregon cliffs like tired hands. Above it stood the Northwind Lighthouse, its glass crown blind, its iron ribs weeping rust into the wind. Inside, Elias Ward sat before a window fogged with salt. He had once worn a Marine uniform, the kind that taught a man to march through storms and smile at death. Now, at 43, he wore flannel shirts and solitude. His hair, once the dark brown of river stones, was streaked with the early silver of grief. His jaw carried a 2-day stubble that refused to be disciplined, and his hands bore the small scars of a life spent fixing what was already broken. He lived like the sea, restless yet motionless, moving only in thought. Every morning he brewed black coffee in a dented percolator and listened to the wind moan through the broken vents. It was not the wind of danger, only the sigh of a place long forgotten by maps. The lighthouse had not worked in years, ever since the storm that killed the old keeper and shattered its great lens. Elias had repaired the tower's stairs and roof, but never dared touch the light itself. To him, it was a tombstone for hope, a grave he visited daily. His only companion, Rex, lay at his feet. The dog was a German shepherd of striking color, ashen gray fur streaked with white around the muzzle, like a veteran with medals of time. At 8 years old, Rex carried the calm authority of experience. Once, he had served as a K9 rescue dog during wildfires in California, trained to find the living among ruins. That life had left him wary but patient, loyal yet haunted. The pair shared a silent understanding born of survival. Neither needed to speak to be heard. Outside, the evening bled into a pale bruise of sky. The ocean looked endless, but Elias no longer saw beauty in its vastness, only distance. He had come here a year after losing Margaret. Cancer had taken her quietly, as if afraid to disturb his denial. He could still remember the hospital's light, too clean, too white, when she whispered, "Find somewhere the stars still shine for you." He had promised, though he hadn't understood. Now, every night, he stared at the dead lantern above him and wondered if this was the place she meant. He rose from the chair, joints cracking softly, and poured the last of his coffee into the sink. The metal rang with a hollow note that seemed to echo his chest. "Another perfect day in paradise," he muttered, voice rough as gravel. Rex lifted his head, one ear twitching as if disagreeing. The dog always seemed to believe there was more beyond the gray horizon, something Elias had forgotten how to see. The kitchen was sparse, a wooden table scarred with burn marks, a shelf of canned soup, a single photograph of Margaret smiling on a pier, her red hair blown wild by the wind. She had been small, with eyes the color of green glass after rain, always full of questions about the world. Elias had never known how to answer them. He was a man built for doing, not dreaming. Yet when she laughed, he felt the heavy machinery of his soul ease for a moment, as if her voice turned the gears of mercy. Now, That laughter existed only in memory, brittle as old film. He walked up the spiral stairs of the tower, each step creaking under his weight. The lantern room smelled of rust and ghostly oil. Through the cracked glass, the sea stretched outward, silver, infinite, indifferent. A dozen seagulls wheeled below, their cries carried upward like fragments of a lost language. Elias placed a hand on the cold metal of the lantern, tracing the cracks that spidered through the glass. "You and me both," he murmured. "Broken things recognizing their kin." Rex followed, paws clinking against the stairs, tail brushing the rail. He circled once before lying down near the entrance, eyes fixed on Elias. The dog's presence grounded him, kept him from dissolving into the fog of his thoughts. Sometimes Elias believed Rex could sense Margaret's absence, the same way he could sense storms before they arrived. By nightfall, the wind rose. The lighthouse groaned like an old ship at anchor. Elias lit a small oil lamp and set it by the window. He no longer trusted electricity. The last lightning storm had fried half the circuits. He preferred the amber flicker of the lamp. It reminded him of evenings in their old home, Margaret reading on the couch while Rex slept by the fire. He could almost hear her voice now, soft and amused. "You keep fixing everything but yourself." He smiled at the ghost of her words, then looked away quickly, ashamed of the smile. Grief, he had learned, was a quiet vandal. It didn't shout, it just rearranged the furniture of your heart until nothing fit anymore. As the hour deepened, he took a weathered journal from the shelf. Inside, pages of his own handwriting sprawled unevenly, half memories, half confessions. He wrote not for clarity, but for survival. Tonight's entry was short. "Still here. The sea sounds like her breathing. I don't know if I'm keeping the lighthouse alive or if it's keeping me." Rex stirred suddenly, ears pricking. He stood, moved toward the trap door near the kitchen steps, and sniffed intensely. Elias frowned. "What is it, boy?" The dog growled low, then began to scratch at the floorboards. The sound was sharp, insistent. "Hey, stop that," Elias said, kneeling beside him. He pressed his ear to the wood. For a moment, only silence. Then, an echo, a hollow resonance beneath the floor. He sat back, surprised. He had lived here nearly 2 years and never noticed. "You found yourself a ghost, huh?" he whispered. Rex wagged his tail once, eyes bright in the lamplight. Elias fetched a screwdriver and pried at the edge of a warped board. The nail came loose with a groan. Beneath, he saw stone steps descending into darkness. A cellar? Impossible. No plans had ever shown it. He hesitated, staring into the black gap. A cold breath of air rose from below, smelling faintly of salt and old oil. Rex barked once, softly, as if urging him on. "All right," Elias muttered. "Let's see what's hiding in your lighthouse." He took the lamp and descended. The stone walls were damp, slick with age. The steps wound into a small chamber lined with shelves. Most were empty, but one corner held a wooden trunk bound in rusted iron. Elias brushed off the dust and unlatched it. Inside lay several folded maps, a brass compass, and a small leather-bound journal wrapped in oilcloth. On its cover, carved faintly into the leather, were 2 words: Thomas Avery. The name stirred something. He'd seen it in an old coastal registry, the last keeper before the fire that ruined the light. He opened the journal carefully. The handwriting was elegant but firm, written in fountain ink that had bled into the paper over time. The first line read, "If you find this, keep the light alive. It belongs to all who are lost." Elias flipped through pages filled with entries, dates from the 1920s, weather notes, and cryptic phrases like 3 souls ashore, and signal fire hidden beneath the cliff. But near the end, one entry froze him. The sea takes, but it also returns. Every lightkeeper must choose which truth to believe. He closed the book slowly, heart hammering. For years he had chosen the first truth, that the sea only takes. Now, a stranger long dead was asking him to consider the other. Rex nudged his hand, sensing his trembling. Elias smiled faintly. "You brought me something, didn't you?" The dog whined softly, leaning against his leg. Above them, thunder rolled, a distant growl over the horizon. A storm was coming. He climbed back up, journal clutched to his chest. In the lantern room, the wind howled so fiercely it rattled the glass panes. Elias looked toward the horizon, where lightning split the clouds into silver veins. Somewhere out there, ships still moved through the storm. He thought of Margaret's words. "Find somewhere the stars still shine for you." Perhaps she had not meant peace. Perhaps she had meant purpose. He turned the pages again, stopping at a faded sketch of the lighthouse, its beam stretching far into the dark sea. At its edge was a single note in smaller handwriting. "Even when the lamp goes out, remember, light never dies, it only waits." The sentence struck him like a bell ringing in fog. For the first time in years, he looked at the great silent lantern above with something close to reverence instead of regret. Maybe the light was waiting for him. Outside, the first raindrops began to fall, tapping gently against the glass. Rex lay beside his boots, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but watchful. Elias sat beside the broken lantern, the journal open on his lap, feeling the heartbeat of the storm through the tower's bones. For the first time in a long time, he did not feel entirely alone. The morning after the storm broke with an uncanny stillness. The ocean lay smooth as polished glass, yet Elias Ward sensed unease in the calm, as if the sea itself were holding its breath. He had barely slept. The discovery of Thomas Avery's journal had kept him awake, reading by the dim flicker of the oil lamp until dawn. Each page was an echo from another age, a hymn to duty and faith. Yet one thing gnawed at him, the missing pages near the end. Someone had torn them out decades ago, but the edges were fresh, the fibers clean. That meant they had been removed recently. He sat on the wooden steps of the lighthouse, the wind brushing his face with the faint scent of salt and pine. Rex lay beside him, tail flicking lazily but ears alert. The dog's coat shimmered faintly in the slanted morning light, and his eyes, amber and intelligent, never stopped scanning the distance. "You feel it too, don't you?" Elias murmured. Rex answered with a soft huff, as if confirming. A sound broke the quiet, the crunch of tires on gravel. A black SUV rolled up the narrow road that wound from the cliffs. It was too new, too polished for this forgotten stretch of coast. From the driver's seat stepped a man who did not belong to this place. He was in his early 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a suntanned face marked by lines of indulgence rather than labor. His black hair was slicked back with precision, his chin clean-shaven, revealing the hard symmetry of someone used to control. His name was Victor Crane, and his suit alone cost more than Elias had spent on the lighthouse's entire restoration. Crane walked with the confidence of a man who had never been denied anything. When he smiled, it was an act of performance, not warmth. "Mr. Ward," he said, voice smooth as oil. "Quite the place you've got here. Shame it's rotting away in the wind." Elias said nothing, just studied him. Years of service had trained him to read intent before words. Crane's stance screamed ownership before negotiation. "I represent Crane Coastal Developments. the man continued, gesturing towards the horizon. "We're building a resort 3 miles south. Northwind Point is the last piece of coastline still in private hands. I can make it worth your while." Rex stood, a low growl vibrating through his chest. Crane's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning, brittle and bright. "Beautiful dog," he said, "but you might want to keep him leashed. The cliffs are dangerous." Elias folded his arms. "So's trespassing." Crane chuckled, but there was an edge beneath the sound. "I admire loyalty, Mr. Ward, truly. But this lighthouse has no future. It's a liability. Unsafe, unprofitable, unneeded. Let me take it off your hands." "The light still has work to do," Elias said quietly. Crane tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "The light doesn't even work." "It will." Something cold flickered in. Crane's expression, a flash of irritation quickly masked by charm. "Well, if you change your mind, I'll leave my card." He placed it on the railing, brushed imaginary dust from his lapel, and walked back to the SUV. The sound of the engine faded down the cliff road, but Elias felt the echo of the man linger like oil on water. Inside, he picked up the card. The name Victor Crane, CEO, gleamed in embossed silver. On the back, handwritten in looping script, "Everything has a price." Elias crumpled it and tossed it into the trash. Days passed, each one carrying the same wind-whipped silence. Elias tried to immerse himself in repairs, sanding rust from the railing, oiling the hinges, rewiring what he could. Yet the sense of intrusion gnawed at him. Rex had grown restless, pacing more often at night, his ears twitching toward the cliffs. Twice, Elias caught the glint of headlights across the bay where no road should be. He told himself it was imagination. But the third night, he heard the lock of the storage shed click softly in the dark. Lantern in hand, he stepped outside, the beam slicing through the fog. The shed door was ajar, padlock hanging broken. Inside, a few old tools were scattered, but what made his stomach tighten was the absence of Avery's journal from the work table. He had left it there that afternoon. Now only a faint dust outline remained. Elias's mind raced. He had shown it to no one. Only Crane knew of his presence here. The timing was too exact to be coincidence. He checked the footprints in the damp soil. Boots, heavy tread, at least 2 men. The tracks led toward the southern ridge before vanishing into the rocky slope. He stood there for a long time, gripping the lantern, the wind tugging at his coat. The rage that swelled inside him was not loud. It was quiet, coiled, the kind that came from men who had already buried too many things. The next morning, he drove into the small town of Port Lorne, 20 miles inland, seeking answers. The main street was a strip of weathered storefronts and fishing boats. The only sign of life came from a cafe called Mariner's Rest. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and fried batter. Behind the counter was a woman in her late 30s, tall and willow-slender, her blonde hair tied in a loose braid. Her name tag read, Clara Jensen. She looked up from polishing a glass. "You must be the man from the Lighthouse. Word travels fast around here." Her tone wasn't unkind, more curious, edged with the coastal habit of minding everyone's business. Elias nodded. "Elias Ward. Coffee, black." Clara poured it, studying him over the rim of her glasses. "You hear about Crane? He's been buying everything south of the jetty. Folks say he's turning the coast into a playground for people who think driftwood's decor." Elias raised a brow. "You know him?" "Know of him." She set the cup down with a small thud. "He doesn't like being told no. A few years back, he wanted to buy my father's boatyard. Dad refused. 2 months later, inspectors declared the whole property unsafe. Next week, Crane bought it at half price. Dad had a stroke the same year. So, yeah, I know the type. Her voice hardened on the last words, the calm in her blue-gray eyes shifting to something steely. Elias recognized the tone. People who had been burned and learned to keep their scars hidden under routine. "Did he send someone out our way recently?" Elias asked. She hesitated, glancing toward the door as if to check for listening ears. "Maybe. A man named Harlan. Works odd jobs for Crane. Big guy, bald, scar under his eye. Drove through 2 nights ago, said he was surveying land boundaries." That fit the boot prints. Elias finished his coffee in silence. Before leaving, Clara called out, "Be careful, Lighthouse man. Crane doesn't like being reminded that not everything can be bought." Back at Northwind, the sky had turned the color of pewter. As Elias parked his truck, Rex ran to meet him, tail stiff, nose twitching. The dog circled once, then stopped at the door, hackles raised. Elias followed his gaze. Something glinted near the threshold. He bent down and found a small piece of torn leather. It matched the journal's cover. That night, he sat in the tower with the oil lamp burning low. He turned over the leather scrap in his fingers, feeling the faint grooves of Thomas Avery's initials. "They want to bury this place," he said softly, "the same way they buried him." Rex rested his head on Elias's boot, his breathing steady and sure. He opened his own notebook and wrote, "If light is memory, then some men fear it because it makes their shadows visible." Outside, thunder rumbled far out at sea. The calm was ending. The storm began with a silence so deep it made the air feel hollow. Then, as if the world exhaled, the first gust struck the cliffs, and the Northwind lighthouse shuddered to life. Rain swept sideways across the glass panes, and the sky cracked open with veins of light. Inside, Elias Ward braced a shoulder against the door as the wind clawed at it. Rex barked furiously, his thick fur drenched, claws scraping against the floorboards. The dog's instincts were sharper than the storm. He was not barking at the thunder, but at the sea itself. Elias grabbed his flashlight, its beam barely piercing the swirling rain. "Easy, boy," he muttered, though his own pulse quickened. Through the window, he caught sight of movement below the cliffs, a flicker of orange and white in the chaos. It wasn't lightning. It was a flare, faint and desperate. He yanked open the door. Wind and water exploded inward, stinging his face like gravel. "Stay!" he shouted to Rex, but the dog bolted ahead, a gray streak against the black night. Cursing, Elias followed. The storm hit him like a wall, each step through the slick mud a battle. Down by the rocks, waves roared like living things, smashing themselves against the jagged shore. Between bursts of lightning he saw it, a small fishing boat half impaled on the reef. The flare sputtered near the bow, and 3 shadows clung to the wreck. "Hold on," he yelled, though the wind tore the words apart. Rex was already in the surf, barking wildly, his body half submerged. The dog reached the boat first, teeth gripping a torn rope that dangled from the stern. Elias waded in, the cold biting through his coat like knives. "Good boy, hold steady," he gasped, hauling the rope around a jut of rock. A woman's voice cried out, thin but fierce, "Please, my children!" Lightning split the sky, illuminating her face for a heartbeat. Young, maybe 30, hair plastered to her cheeks, eyes wide with terror and exhaustion. 2 children huddled behind her, no older than 8 or 9, their arms locked around her waist. Elias reached out, his muscles burning. "Take my hand!" he shouted. The woman hesitated only a second before pushing the older child toward him. Elias gripped the boy's wrist and pulled with all his strength. Rex barked encouragement, anchoring the rope with his body. One by one, he dragged them onto the rocks, collapsing beside them as the sea swallowed what was left of the boat. The woman coughed seawater, shivering uncontrollably. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was rough, her accent faintly Eastern European, soft consonants shaped by survival. "I'm Lena Kovalenko." Elias nodded, catching his breath. "Elias Ward, you're safe now." Her eyes darted toward the ocean, fear rekindled. "No, we're not. He'll come." "Who?" "Crane," she said, the name cutting through the wind like a blade. "Victor Crane. He's the one. We escaped his men. They were using boats, smuggling people in the dark." Elias's jaw tightened. The missing pages of Avery's journal, the threats, the lights across the bay, it all snapped together. "Come on," he said. "The lighthouse. It's the only place we can make a stand." They climbed the hill, the gale pushing against them. By the time they reached the tower, the lantern room trembled under the storm's weight. Elias guided them inside, shutting the heavy door. "There's a heater upstairs," he said. "Get dry." Lena wrapped her children in a wool blanket. The boy, Nico, was thin, with dark hair plastered to his forehead, his lips trembling but eyes defiant. The younger girl, Anya, had Margaret's green eyes. Elias froze for a moment when he saw them, as if the storm itself had stopped to let her memory breathe. Rex curled beside the children, pressing his warmth against them. Anya reached out, tiny fingers sinking into his wet fur. "He's warm," she whispered. "He's brave," Elias corrected, voice softer than he meant. Upstairs, the lighthouse groaned, and the lights flickered once before dying completely. Darkness swallowed them. Elias turned to the wall where Avery's old diagrams hung, faded and yellowed. The mechanical crank system, manual backup for the lantern, was still there, but long unused. He ran his hand over the rusted gear. "You're not done yet," he muttered. Below, the crash of the waves changed. He heard the crunch of tires on gravel through the storm. Headlights slashed briefly across the lower windows. Lena gasped. "It's him!" Elias's heart pounded. "Get upstairs, lock the door." "But now!" She obeyed, ushering the children up the narrow spiral stairs. Elias grabbed the old flare gun from the wall and loaded a single round. Outside, through the sheets of rain, figures moved. 3 men, flashlights cutting through the dark. Crane was among them, trench coat whipping in the wind. Even soaked, he looked immaculate, the sort of man who believed the world itself would never dare stain him. His face was lit intermittently by lightning, sharp, sculpted, eyes like cold glass. "Ward!" Crane's voice boomed through the storm. "I know you're in there. Hand them over and this ends easy." Elias stepped into the lantern room, shouted down through the stairwell, "You come any closer and you'll meet the rocks the same way they did." Crane's laughter carried through the wind. "You think that light of yours can save you? It's dead, old man." Elias turned to the gears, gripping the metal crank. "We'll see." He poured what was left of the kerosene into the ignition tray, the fumes thick and acrid. He struck a match. The flames sputtered, flickered, then caught. He began to turn the crank, the gears grinding like an old beast waking from hibernation. Sparks leapt, then a blinding beam burst to life, slicing through the black storm. The lighthouse roared with light for the first time in 20 years. Below, Crane shielded his eyes, cursing. "Shut it down!" he barked. His men moved toward the door, axes in hand. Rex growled, teeth bared, ready. Elias took aim and fired the flare gun. The shot exploded above the rocks, a red star burning through rain, signal to any ship within miles. The Coast Guard would see it. He knew it. Then the door burst open. 2 of Crane's men stumbled in, faces hidden under soaked hoods. Rex lunged before Elias could move, knocking one to the ground. The man screamed as the dog's jaws clamped on his arm. Elias swung the butt of the flare gun into the other's jaw, bone cracked, and the man fell. Crane himself stepped into the doorway, gun in hand. His voice was calm, deliberate. "You should have sold, Ward. The world doesn't need heroes anymore." Elias squared his shoulders. "Then it'll settle for a keeper." The two men faced each other in the strobe of lightning. Crane fired, the bullet whistling past Elias's head, embedding into the wall. Elias charged, grabbing Crane's arm, forcing it upward. They struggled, bodies slamming against the railing. The light spun above them, casting long, feverish shadows across the room. Crane snarled, shoving him back. "You can't stop this. You think anyone will remember you when this tower falls?" Elias caught a glimpse of Lena and the children peering from the stairwell. Their faces, terrified, waiting, became his anchor. "They will," he said, and drove his shoulder into Crane's chest. The man stumbled backward, slipped on the wet floor, and crashed into the lower landing. The wind roared louder than their breaths. The beam of light struck the sea, and far out in the dark, a siren answered. The Coast Guard. Salvation was coming. Crane groaned, trying to rise. "You'll regret this," he hissed, but his words were drowned by the thunder as Rex stood over him, teeth bared, a living shadow in the flash of lightning. Elias looked at the blinding lantern above, its glow trembling against the storm. He gripped the crank tighter, forcing it to keep turning. His muscles burned, his lungs screamed, but he didn't stop. The light must stay alive. When the first blue strobe lights appeared on the horizon, he let go, collapsing against the railing. The storm had not stopped, but the sea had changed its song. It no longer sounded like mourning, but memory. Dawn arrived, like a held breath finally released. The horizon was still gray and bruised, but the fury of the night had passed. Waves that had once clawed at the cliffs now rolled in exhausted sighs. The Northwind Lighthouse stood battered but unbroken, its granite walls streaked with soot and salt. The great lens still turned slowly, creaking like an old heart learning to beat again. Inside, Elias Ward sat on the cold floor of the lantern room, his hands trembling from exhaustion. The storm had left him soaked, bruised but alive. Rex lay beside him, chest rising shallowly, a dark patch of blood staining his fur near the shoulder. Elias tore a strip from his own sleeve and wrapped the wound with steady, practiced fingers. "You'll be fine, soldier," he murmured, his voice hoarse. The dog blinked once, tail giving a faint thump in reply. From below came the faint sound of children's voices. He turned and saw Lena Kovalenko climbing the spiral stairs, carrying little Anya in her arms, while Nico followed behind, one hand clinging to the rail. Their faces were pale but calm. Lena's soaked hair clung to her cheeks. Her gray sweater hung loose on her slender frame, torn at the elbow. Despite her exhaustion, there was a quiet grace in the way she moved, the dignity of someone who had endured too much to fear what came next. "They're here," she said softly. "We saw the lights on the water." Elias stood, peering through the shattered glass panes. Far beyond the foam and mist, red and blue strobes glimmered like stars reborn. A Coast Guard cutter approached the bay, its horn echoing low and steady. Relief washed through him so hard it almost hurt. When the rescue crew arrived, they came swift and sure, men in orange rain suits moving with disciplined precision. Their leader, Commander Daniel Mercer, was a solid man in his late 40s, with close-cropped hair and a face carved by years of wind and responsibility. His uniform was soaked, but his movements were efficient, each gesture carrying the authority of someone who had spent his life saving others from chaos. He climbed the final steps to the lantern room, flashlight beam cutting across the wreckage. "Mr. Ward?" he called, voice deep and steady. "That's me." Mercer extended a gloved hand. "Commander Mercer, U.S. Coast Guard. We picked up your flare. Heard it halfway to Astoria. Hell of a signal." Elias managed a tired half-smile. Wasn't trying to be subtle. Mercer's gaze swept the room. The shattered glass, the scorched railing, the faint smell of gunpowder. His eyes settled on Crane, who lay on the lower landing, wrists bound with a piece of torn rope, groaning faintly. "That him?" "Victor Crane," Elias said. "You'll find enough evidence here to keep him off the ocean for the rest of his life." He reached into his coat and handed over the remaining pages of Thomas Avery's journal. The old paper was damp but intact, the ink running like tears across the lines. "These will tell you everything. The trafficking routes, the codes, they're all there. Avery tried to warn people once. Guess he was still doing it through me." Mercer turned the fragile pages carefully. "You did good work, Mr. Ward. Damn good work." Elias looked at the light overhead, still turning, still alive. "It wasn't just me." He glanced at Rex, whose head rested against his boot. "He kept me from giving up." Mercer nodded with the kind of understanding that didn't need words. "We'll get your dog treated. There's a medic down below." Outside, the wind softened to a tired whisper. The rescue team escorted Lena and her children to the waiting boat. Nico looked back once, eyes wide, and gave a small, solemn salute to Rex, before disappearing into the mist. Elias watched them go, feeling the strange weight of both loss and peace. By noon, the wrecked remains of the night had been cleared. Crane and his men were taken into custody, their weapons confiscated. Mercer stayed behind a moment longer, standing beside Elias on the outer balcony. Together they looked over the endless expanse of ocean, where sunlight now glinted through rifts in the clouds. "You planning to stay here?" Mercer asked. Elias rested his hands on the railing. The sea breeze was cold but clean. "This place still needs a keeper." The commander smiled faintly. "World could use a few more like you." He clapped Elias's shoulder, then descended the stairs, boots echoing in rhythm with the slow turning of the light. For the first time in years, the lighthouse was filled not with silence, but with the steady hum of purpose. Over the next weeks, word spread along the coast. Fishermen who had seen the beam that night spoke of it like a miracle. Volunteers came from nearby villages, bringing lumber, paint, and tools. Among them was Jonas Reed, a retired carpenter with a limp and weathered hands. Jonas was in his late 60s, short and broad, his beard salt white and his laugh a deep rumble. "Used to fix boats," he told Elias, hammer in hand. "Guess a lighthouse ain't so different. Both keep folks afloat." They worked side by side, patching the broken glass, repairing the railings, and repainting the outer walls. Children from Port Lorne brought sandwiches and hot tea. Clara Jensen herself arrived one afternoon, carrying supplies. "Told you Crane wouldn't win?" she said with a grin, her braid wind-tossed. Elias found himself smiling back, the lines at his eyes easing. Through it all, Rex recovered slowly. His wound healed into a scar that ran across his shoulder like a badge of loyalty. Every evening, he sat at Elias's feet, watching the sun dip below the water. Sometimes, when the wind was calm, they could hear laughter echoing faintly from the village, the sound of life moving forward. One evening, Lena returned. Her hair was cut short now, a symbol of starting anew. She wore a simple gray coat and carried a small basket of bread. "We're staying in Port Lorne," she said softly. The children are going to school. I wanted to thank you." Elias shook his head. "You already did when you kept going. That's thanks enough." She smiled, the kind that reached her tired eyes. "Then at least let me leave this." She handed him a small object wrapped in cloth. When he unfolded it, he found a piece of driftwood carved into the shape of a lantern. Its surface was etched with a single word: Light Keeper. After she left, Elias set the carving on the window ledge. The sun had nearly vanished, leaving only the faint reflection of the first star on the glass. He turned to Rex, who thumped his tail lazily. "Guess we've got work to do, partner." That night, the Northwind Lighthouse shone brighter than it had in decades. Its beams swept across the quiet sea, touching the waves, the village, and even the far cliffs where the storm had once broken its fury. Word spread that it had been renamed. The townsfolk chose to call it Lighthouse Sanctuary, in honor of those who had been saved and those who had chosen to stay. Elias climbed to the top of the tower and looked out at the horizon. The air was cold, crisp, but peaceful. He thought of Margaret, her voice, her laughter, and for the first time her memory didn't ache. It warmed him, gentle as dawn. "We did it," he whispered. The beam of light turned slowly, sweeping across the dark sea like the hand of forgiveness itself. Rex barked once, softly, as if answering. Together they stood watch until the stars burned through the clouds, guardians of a coast that finally knew peace. Spring came softly to the Oregon coast, like a memory returning after a long silence. The cliffs that had once been blackened by storms were now dressed in green, and the sea that had raged against the world had learned to breathe again. The Northwind Lighthouse stood proud at the edge of the headland, its newly painted walls shining pale against the sky. The townsfolk had done their work well. Every board, every beam carried a piece of their gratitude. When the wind moved through the tower, it no longer howled. It hummed, as though the sea itself had decided to sing. Elias Ward stood on the outer balcony, wrapped in a wool sweater that had once belonged to Margaret. It smelled faintly of cedar and sea air. Time had carved new lines into his face, but they were gentler now, no longer etched by loss but by peace hard-earned. His beard was trimmed close, silver glinting along his jaw like the foam on dark water. The months since the storm had been a kind of quiet resurrection. Beside him, Rex sat like a sentinel. His fur had grown back thick and glossy, though a scar still marked his shoulder, a crooked line of courage. The dog was older now, slower in his movements, but his eyes burned with the same amber loyalty. Whenever the wind shifted, he would lift his muzzle as if scenting something far away: salt, pine, and perhaps memory. The lighthouse's beam turned slowly above them, sweeping the calm horizon with its white eye. Each revolution was steady and sure, a heartbeat that reached miles into the sea. Below, the village had gathered for the relighting ceremony, the official return of the North Wind's beacon. Fishermen, carpenters, children, and elders lined the rocky path, their faces glowing in the half-light. Clara Jensen stood near the base of the stairs, her blonde braid flicking in the wind. She had traded her cafe apron for a soft gray coat. When she looked up, she raised a hand in salute. Elias returned the gesture with a nod. A small boy stood beside her, no older than 7, with a wool cap pulled low over his ears. He held a small wooden model of a boat, crudely carved but lovingly made. "Is that the man who saved the people from the sea?" the boy asked, tugging Clara's sleeve. She smiled. "Yes, that's him. And that's Rex, the dog who kept the light alive." Up above, Elias didn't hear the words, but he saw their faces. He turned the brass key in the old ignition panel, the one he'd restored himself from Avery's diagrams. The mechanism hummed, and the lantern brightened until it was pure, unwavering gold. The crowd below erupted into applause that echoed against the cliffs. For a moment, Elias simply watched, overwhelmed by the sound of joy, the sound of life that had once been so far from him. Later, as the villagers drifted away, leaving baskets of food and flowers at the base of the lighthouse, Elias remained alone with the sea. He leaned against the railing, eyes tracing the horizon where the light disappeared into mist. "She would have loved this," he whispered. It was not a thought of grief, but gratitude. Margaret had always believed the heart could rebuild itself, given enough faith and a reason to keep the flame. He felt a tug at his sleeve. A child had lingered behind, a boy with freckles, maybe 9, wearing an oversized wool coat. His name, Elias recalled, was Theo Larson, son of one of the fishermen. Theo was thin, all knees and curiosity, with sandy hair that the wind couldn't quite decide which direction to take. He looked up with wide gray eyes. "Mr. Ward." Elias crouched so they were eye level. "What is it, son?" The boy hesitated, glancing toward the light that rotated lazily above them. "Who do you keep the lamp on for? The fishermen? The ships?" Elias smiled, the corners of his eyes softening. "For them, yes, but also for the ones who haven't found their way home yet." Theo frowned, thoughtful. "You mean lost people?" "Not just people," Elias said gently. "Sometimes it's not the sea we get lost in. It's ourselves." He rested a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the small tremor of life there. "The light reminds us to keep looking, even when the night seems endless." Theo nodded, his expression solemn in that way only children could manage. "Then I'll remember that," he said, and ran off down the hill, calling for his father. Elias watched him go, a faint smile still on his lips. Rex shifted beside him, pressing his muzzle against Elias's hand. "You heard that, didn't you?" Elias said. The dog wagged his tail once, eyes bright with something that looked very much like understanding. That evening, the air cooled. A faint mist crept in from the water, wrapping the lighthouse in a gauzy veil. Elias went inside and climbed to the lantern room. The machinery purred quietly, a sound he had come to love. On the wall hung Thomas Avery's old compass, restored and polished. Its needle trembled slightly but always found north. Beneath it was the wooden carving Lena had given him, the lantern etched with Lightkeeper. He stood there for a long time, the ocean stretching endlessly below, thinking of the people whose lives had crossed his own. Clara, with her fierce kindness, Lena, rebuilding her family, Commander Mercer, who had written him last month to say Crane's trial had begun, and the villagers who had given this tower back its soul. He thought, too, of Margaret, how she had once said that love was not a thing to be kept, but to be carried forward. Rex rose and padded to the window, ears pricking at the faint rumble of waves. The light swept across his face, catching in his eyes. For a moment, Elias saw his reflection there, the man he had been, the man he had become. He walked onto the balcony, sweater collar turned up against the chill. The sea below glittered with faint trails of moonlight. Somewhere out there, a ship's bell rang, distant but clear. He looked toward the sound, and a strange calm filled him, a sense of being both keeper and kept. The lighthouse beam turned once more, stretching far over the water. Down in the village, lamps began to flicker on one by one, echoing its glow. Life answering light. Elias placed a hand on the cool railing and whispered, "For those still drifting." The words carried into the wind, soft but sure. Rex settled beside him, eyes reflecting the rotating beam. His breathing was steady, rhythmic, as though in tune with the turning gears. Elias watched the horizon until the stars appeared, scattered like embers across the night. He thought of the question the boy had asked, and the promise he had given. Not just to the sea or to the past, but to everyone who needed a light to come home to. And as the wind moved through the lighthouse, it sounded not like mourning, but like a lullaby, the sea's way of saying thank you. In every story where darkness meets light, there lies a quiet reminder that miracles are not distant. They dwell within every act of courage, every spark of faith. The Northwind Lighthouse was never just stone and glass. It was a vessel for grace, a symbol that even when storms rage, God still guides the lost home. Perhaps the true miracle was not in the flame rekindled, but in the hearts that chose to believe again. In our own lives, we each carry a small lighthouse within us, a chance to forgive, to help, to shine when others have gone dim. When we show kindness, when we lift someone who's fallen, we become the light keepers of our own shores. If this story touched your heart, share it so its light can travel farther. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe to join our storytelling family, and may God bless you and all who still wait for their dawn.